Jenny Scott has published stories, poems, articles, and book reviews in newspapers, magazines, and literary journals. She won a national prize in a Blue Mountain Arts Poetry Contest and was poetry editor of Arts Beat magazine. She was most recently published in Bark magazine. She's attended many writing retreats, including the Jackson Hole Writers Conference in Wyoming. She is currently working on a novel that has been almost finished for a very long time. This is her third appearance at Waterline Writers. Welcome, Jenny Scott.
Is that good? Thank you. And I reiterate, thank you for coming out on this cold night. I'm going to read a chapter from this novel I've been working on. I read one chapter a long time ago, and this is the third chapter that I'm going to be reading tonight. Just a couple quick things you need to know before I begin. My protagonist, Vern, has discovered that he loves the smell of pig shit. He and his wife, Mimi, live next to an organic pig farmer, Joe. Joe and his family are all creative, care about the earth, self-sustainability, and getting off the grid. Vern and Mimi live in a farmhouse but have sold their land to be farmed by someone else. Vern had a rough upbringing with an unstable mother. 2 years ago, Vern and Mimi lost their young son through a tragedy, but at this point, the reader doesn't know how. Vern can't get over his grief and is finding it almost impossible to communicate with Mimi, whom he still loves very much. Due to the tension, Vern has been sleeping on the sofa, which he sometimes falls off of in the middle of the night. Right before the chapter I'm going to read, Vern was rushing over to Joe's house when he stepped on a nail. It went through his boot and into his foot. He also twisted his ankle. Joe cleaned the wound and wrapped it for him. Chapter 3, Ruder Still. That evening, Mimi hovered largely in his peripheral vision. "Let me see your foot," she said. Vern sat at the dining room table with his box of bills. He kept his important papers in an old cardboard boot box. Inside, he placed dividers with the headings of taxes, bills, correspondence, etc. Since Paul's death, the box gave him comfort like nothing else besides pig shit. The box was his only bearable connection to the distant outside world, his one area of responsibility. Now that he didn't have to deal with the rental land, it was easy to do the business he needed. He wrote his checks for the mortgage, gas, phone, cable, and credit card invoices on time, every time. He kept a free seed company calendar in his box and checked the due dates frequently. He had an assortment of pens, and he took some time choosing which one he would use. He was aware that he could convert to paperless pain, but the thought of not being able to use his pens filled him with dread. He flipped through the bills and then his bank book. Their savings were dwindling. "Let me just see the wound," she said again. "No," he snapped. "It's no big deal, just a little puncture and a swollen ankle. There's nothing you can do about it." She went upstairs for a while, but came back down 20 minutes later. She sat on his sofa and flipped through a New Yorker magazine. Then she got up and began to pace around. When he finally looked at her, he saw she was wearing a sweatsuit, God help him. It was dark gray, tent-like, her limbs being the ample poles the generous material draped against. "You need to keep the cut clean, you know," she said. "Just let me clean it for you." "Can't you leave me alone?" he asked. "Don't you have anything else to do besides bother me?" He saw the sudden hurt in her eyes and truly hated how rude he was, but couldn't control himself. Yet every barb he threw at her slingshot back to sting him harder. He rifled through his bills to display his busyness, feeling like an emotional murderer, feeling like his mother. Mimi turned away and went upstairs again. He could hear her trying not to cry. His foot and conscience stung all night as he tossed on the sofa. He was alternately hot and cold. He listened to the crickets chirping outside. At one sweaty point, he got up and went out the back door for a breath of cool night air. He hobbled restless through the weak moon darkness, past the kitchen garden, down and around the pond, feeling like an errant rodent. The water was so still. He stood for a while in the shadow of branches. Among the colors he couldn't distinguish, the reddening sumac, the drying purple cornflowers, the butterfly weed, the wild mints and teas, he knew real rodents snuck, solely, twitching their whiskers in fear and wonderment, twitching for some guiding reception. He got cold and went inside. His ankle hurt, his foot stung. He sat on the sofa, switched on a lamp, took off Joe's wrapping, and looked at the wound. It was swollen and bruised, but didn't look anything like the rotting, gangrenous mess he'd imagined. Joe did a good job. Vern limped to the bathroom to clean the wound and rewrap it, but he couldn't find any gauze in the cupboard below the sink. He checked the medicine cabinet above, didn't see any there, rummaged through the under cabinet once more, and found not gauze but an assortment of bandages. He chose a large one, stood up, and crashed his head into the metal corner of the open medicine cabinet. Shit, shit, damn it, shit, he hissed. Now his head was cut, and a tiny trickle of mocking blood slithered down his forehead. He quickly washed and bandaged his foot, found some ointment to slather around his hair near the cut, and limped back to the sofa. He had an awful night. Insomnia plagued him. Insomnia where his stomach was a damp basement floor. He didn't get to sleep until 7 a.m. At 8 a.m., there was a knocking at the front door. "Mimi," he yelled, though his voice came out small and hoarse. He waited for her to come down and answer the door, but she didn't. He envied her strong sleeping, even as he grew more irritated. His head stung and his foot and ankle throbbed. On the bright side, he was still up on the sofa with his sheet. But the blanket was on the floor and he was cold. His stomach was full of trapped gas. The knocking continued. He lay there suffering and thought of the shepherd from Don Quixote who uttered, "For pain like mine demands new modes of song." He felt still attached to some unremembered nightmare as he wondered who would keep knocking like that. Perhaps the Grim Reaper had finally come for him. Since he'd stripped down to his underwear in the evening, he raised himself up and draped the blanket around him. He limped to the door, picturing a large, black, hooded, faceless creature carrying a sickle. He opened it and found it wasn't the Grim Reaper, but maybe worse. There were Joe's wife, Linda, and her 5 live children. Those 5 blonde, blue-eyed children looking like a flock from the movie Village of the Damned. Linda held a plate of bulging homemade cookies. With her fresh, open, freckled face and braids, she looked like she'd just climbed out of a Wyeth painting. "Hi, Vern," she said warmly, gently, as if the words themselves were soft fingers caressing his shoulders. "I know you know the kids, but you probably don't remember who's who. Nobody does," she said. Vern stared at the set of triplets and the set of twins, utterly confused. Linda laughed warmly. Everything that came out of her mouth was caring and warm. There might as well have been little andirons at the corners of her lips. She pointed at each of the older 3. "This is Maggie, Jason, and Greta. They're just about 9. And this," she designated the twins, "is Fern and Rosie. They're 6. 6 and a half, one of them said. Linda had given Vern altogether too much information. His foot hurt, his head hurt, his heart hurt. He just wanted all these blonde people gone. "Joe said you stepped on a nail," Linda said, making a sad face, which made Vern realize that nobody should ever, under any circumstances, make such a condescending expression, no matter how truly they meant it. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Joe didn't tell me you cut your head, too." I cut my head last night," he said, fast and serious, daring her to laugh. "I'm fine now, completely fine." He tried not to sound as tense and annoyed as he felt, but failed. "Well, sorry to bother you, but the kids and I thought you might like some cookies. We baked them this morning." "They're white chocolate chip and mango," one of the girls said. That sounded just horrible. Linda handed him a plate, loosely covered with a decorative cloth that she'd probably just hand-woven on a loom. Vern took them from her like he'd accept an issue of the Watchtower from a Jehovah's Witness. Even the cookies were warm, and he wondered what unearthly time the Doyle family got up each morning. Vern knew he should thank them. He knew it, damn it, but all he managed was a clenched teeth, tight-lipped nod. He so resented the interruption. He had to pee, and he was embarrassed at his wayward appearance, standing there wrapped in his blanket. He hadn't shaved in 2 days and wore a mask of dirty stubble on his face. He glared at the children. They were beautiful. The fat was gone from the backs of the little ones' hands, but their faces were still fresh, with bright pools of eyes. Their skin was perfect, still malleable. He knew they could look different by tomorrow. "We hope you feel better, don't we?" Linda said, a little less warmly. She pushed at the older kids' shoulders, and they looked up quickly, clearly afraid of Vern. Then the boy slowly stuck his hand out for Vern to shake. Vern felt stupid first and pretended not to see the boy's extended hand. Finally, the boy dropped his hand and looked helplessly up at his mother. Linda's warmness evaporated completely. "Let's go," she said to her children. "Come on, quick. Really sorry to bother you." Vern watched them walk away. He wanted to yell out, to call them back, to be nice, but he didn't. Mimi would be furious if she knew how he had acted. He was furious with himself. It occurred to him that Joe would probably be angry with him too, and what would he do if he couldn't visit the only sort of friend he had left? He took a bite of a cookie and was surprised by how good it was. The children looked alike even from behind. The multiples seemed wrong to Vern, greedy, mutant. It was just like Joe and Linda in their mighty creativeness not to bring forth only single prodigies. He shut the door on them. They reminded him of things. Every bloody thing in this world reminded him of something else. But I'm just going to read one in the interest of time, a shorter one. So this is called Hooligans. Years ago, I sat with my grandma in her boast-filled kitchen around the big table topped with sliced meats and tea, and she told me, with her slow mouth moving too quickly, how the world is going to hell. I couldn't help feeling indignant, to blame, for even if it wasn't me, wasn't she hinting it was others like me with our hot music and cool talk, our transistor radios, our push-button phones, and our rollerball pens who were ushering my grandmother's world to hell? Years later, and my daughter texts like she breathes, always, always. And when she broke up with her boyfriend, it was online the minute it happened, maybe before it happened. And everything is sound bites and bookless and virtual. The pencils seem lonely, and I see now that the world is going to hell. But what of Johann Gutenberg? Did his grandmother stand over him with a spoon from the sauerbraten post threateningly in her hand and say, you and your type, you and your movable, undulating, fluid, adjustable, changeable, dancing type. What good do you think it will do to bring literature to the masses, Boccaccio to the shoemakers, Petrarch to the bakers, Dante's to the mothers with their babes at their breasts? Surely, she thought, the world is going to hell. Could it be, though, that the world is not hurtling to hell, toward hell after all? Could it be that we're all just playing with toys, homemade talk, cups with strings, looking for a million different ways to say, to hope, to pray? I'm right here. Are you?